See if I can get yoink. I think that'll work. All right. Any questions about anything on the last? Obviously, we're going to keep kind of these terms. Here's the important thing. These terms are going to keep coming up in whatever conversations we have. Whatever sport, whatever activity, whatever movement strategy, eventually that's coming. Terms like position, velocity, distance, displacement, accelerations, forces, what type of forces, that's just going to be part of our vocabulary. So remember, my intent with this is just to make sure that when we use these terms, we use them to the best of our ability. That's all. It's not like we're going to not make mistakes and use a term, fast and loose. That happens. But to the best of our ability, let's make sure that we have a basic understanding of what these terms mean. And today, one of my favorite variations is impulse and momentum. So let's start with Newton's second law. Remember, Madsen always said, all I apply is Newton's second law. And you can do it a lot of different ways. F is equal to ma. Kinetics and kinematics. Forces influence motion. Muscles influence joint motion, right? In the angular sense. All impulse and momentum is rearranging of that equation. That's all it is. So in other words, what is the color green? Well, technically its own unique color, but it's really a combination of yellow and blue, right? Yellow and blue make green. That was the only one that I had confidence that I could remember the color scheme. But that's weird that like green, technically it's its own color, but it's made up of two separate independent colors, right? So that's what momentum, when we use the term momentum, mass and motion, it's a variation of Newton's second law, and I actually tried to put the little rearranging of the equation. So all that means is that, okay, forces influence objects' motion. Well, acceleration has a recipe for what it means. Change in position, which is displacement. How much time did it take you to displace? That's velocity. How much time did it take you to change your velocity? That's acceleration. So all we're saying is that, hey, do you remember how technically change in velocity over time is acceleration? So they basically just broke the equation into the component parts, cross-multiplied, and said, hey, there's a relationship between the force and how much time you impart that force and the mass of whatever you're looking at and how much it changes its velocity. That's all it is. It's just looking at it in a different way. So momentum. Now momentum, the reason it's used fast and loose a lot is because it can be an analogy for a lot of things. This team has momentum. The momentum's in their favor. Change in momentum, a shift in the right. So we use that term kind of very fast and loose because it describes subjectively kind of what we're talking about. The team's on a roll, right? The team has everything going for it. But what really momentum is just simply mass in motion, okay? And whatever the mass, like glaciers don't have a lot of momentum, they have a lot of mass. They're not moving very fast. Impulse is less often used, but it's the relationship between force and time. I think we could kind of use some layman's terms for this, like if one of the reasons a baseball travels so fast, its momentum changes because when it collides with the bat, that's a lot of force, but in a very small amount of time. So like, think about dissipation of force, right? Like when you dissipate force versus when you put all of that force into one point, right? You're like, oh gosh, that hurts just think about it. When all of that force is concentrated in a smaller unit size with less time to disperse or dissipate, that's going to be a greater value. So impulse we don't typically use as much in the real world, but gosh, we use momentum all the time to describe everything. You know, you could be playing cards and the momentum is in your favor, right? You're on a roll. So I just want to make sure when we use that term momentum, we understand that it's mass in motion. And this relationship technically is what is the force, how much time that force is applied is going to actually be the change in momentum. Meaning, if you're pushing someone on a swing, the force you give them and the amount of time you give that force is going to change their momentum. If we remember, delta is change. Okay. Impulse momentum equation. All right, let's talk about work, power, and energy. Layman's terms. Work, power, and energy. And we almost segue into muscles. Work. Work is, oddly enough, no, I'm going to get to that in a little bit. Force and distance, right? Force and distance. But really, it's measured in energy. Because if you think about it, what is energy? The capacity to do work. It's always been our working definition of energy. And it could be converted, it could be different forms, but energy is the ability to do work. So it takes energy to move things, to change things, okay? Work, this is really weird. The reason work, although we're talking about distance, the reason it's scalar, oddly enough, is because of the energy involved to do it. And energy is scalar. So therefore, work is scalar. And the reason I'm telling this, because now it should make more sense from 310 why isometric work is still work, because there's energy involved in maintaining that position. Isometric work, eccentric work, concentric work, it's all about energy put in to do that task, or making something move, allowing it to move in the other direction, or maintaining that position to prevent it from moving. It takes energy, right? It takes energy, mechanical and physiological. I introduced you to those concepts, okay? Power. Power. Power is simply how much time did it take you to do the work? So again, for your projects, for our work, when we get into groups and talk about these things, we just want to try to make sure we don't play fast and loose with it, although it's normal and natural. Remember from last week, I said, guys, a lot of these physics terms, our brains know the physics without like us giving ourselves credit for it. And I use the 40-yard dash. What is a 40-yard dash test of? Speed. What? We don't give the results in meters per second or miles per hour. We give it in a literal scalar unit of time. But we infer speed because everybody's displacing the same. We do the calculations in our mind to say the smaller the time, the greater the average velocity. We do that without giving ourselves credit. It's the same thing with power. So if you think about a power lift, what's a common type of power lift? A power clean, right? So you think about when you get judged on power clean, right? I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not like in the Olympics with like gymnastics, like you don't have like the Russian judge who's always going to mess with the Americans and give them a little score. Like it's literally, did you move it or did you not move it, right? Did you move it or did you not move it? So technically, it's about work. Did you move it or did you not move it? The inference of power is for these specific power lifts or Olympic lifts, You have to move it fast in order to complete the lift. You're not going to be like, I got this. The time element is hidden in the movement strategy. You have to try to get it moving as fast as you can, because the faster it's going up, that means the more time it's going to take to slow down, and you have time to literally pull yourself under the bar. It's powerful because you're trying to move the load swiftly. And I didn't mean that as a Chiefs reference from last night's game. Taylor Swift joke, guys. So do you see how fast and loose could be applied to these things? Because technically a power lift isn't a measure of power, but it's inferred because you're trying to move it as fast as you can, because there's some time involved for you to do some other task. Okay? This is an example. So power is how much time did it take you to do the work? What I have, or what I try to do, is to give some practical examples. Again, I don't like to solve for X per se, but I like to keep variables the same to show you how changes in one thing affect changes in the other. To me, that's the best way to see what we're talking about. So let's do the 40-yard dash. Let's talk. Why is the 40-yard sprint a test of speed when it's measured in time? We've already discussed that. Because your brains understand the formula for speed. And the formula for speed has time as a variable. We're displacing the same on top, so changes at the bottom affect the change in the speed. Okay? Let's look at some other inference. We infer physics all the time. Let's discuss the following. Velocity, we just did. Work. Well, assuming that two people that have the same mass start and finish, one of them doesn't pull up with an injury or fall into a sinkhole, their work would be the same, regardless of how fast they ran. Does that make sense? That's the cliche of, oh, Brian, I heard you ran the 100 at the Vermilion Parish track meet. How'd you do? Dude, I did awesome. I finished. Just like everybody else. We tied. We all did the same work, right? Come on, man. How about? So if we had 3 players running the 40-yard dash, player A is 200 pounds. Player B is 200 pounds, and player C is 250 pounds. Let's do some inference, okay? If player A and B both run the same time, right? They had the same work, because they weighed the same and they displaced the same. But if they ran it in different times, they would have different power. The power output would be different. If you had 2 200-pound players and they did the same work, but one of them did it in less time, that player would be more powerful. Does that make sense? And we didn't have to solve for anything. It's the common sense physics, as I like to call it, that y'all been doing your whole lives. It's just applying it. Now, would you have to do calculations if a 215-pound person ran a 40 in this compared to a 208? Yeah, then we'd have to do that. But I'm just trying to show you what this means. That from a displacement, as long as you finish, everybody's displacing the same. In terms of work, if you weigh the same and you displace the same, you did the same work. But in terms of power, whoever completed the work in less time was more powerful. Cool. So think of it like this. Several years ago, there was a professor named Dr. Clemens, and he did a little research project that I assisted him in. And it was, because again, they use a lot of terms like explosive power and strength, it's fascinating. If somebody is doing a max on a bench press or a squat, is there anybody there with a stopwatch saying, you got 5 seconds to do it? You know, did you do it? Did you do the work or did you not do the work? Does that make sense? So, inference of power. If me and someone else are doing bench press and I'm doing 200 pounds and I'm like, Kelly Clarkson. And then the next person gets on and is like, whoop. We did the same work, but that person is obviously more powerful because they did that work in a lot less time. Does that make sense how we kind of use power in our everyday biomechanical lives? Work over time. How much time did it take you to do the work? We could also look at this as improvement of performance, right? So in other words, let's say I struggle with that 200-pound max, but then over time, as I train, I do it in less time. I'm becoming more powerful. Didn't have to solve for X. I just have to understand that work per unit time is what power is. Okay? Here's another analogy. If a 250-pound person ran the same time as a 200-pound person, that person would be more powerful. Even though they ran the same time, the 250 horse did more work, right? So that's another way power can be. Or think of it like this. Would you rather stand and get hit on a football field? 2 people running 4.6 40s, one of them weighs 200, the other weighs 250, right? I think you kind of know, your mind did the physics for it. That's all I'm saying, is that same work, variations in time, or same time, variations in work. Both of them affect power. Was this helpful? Okay. And again, for the first test, will you have to know basic definitions that are supplied on these? Yes. But more than that, when you get into your projects and when you get into group conversations, it's just to try to use the right terms for what you're trying to say. Okay. This is the analogy that I just gave about the power clean, right? It's power clean, but it's not a measure of power at all. In fact, technically, I guess it's not even a measure of work because you could have different people, different heights, right? So the power gets inferred because there is an element of speed that comes with being able to perform the task. That you have to have time in order to get your butt under the bar. So therefore, you want to move the bar as fast as possible on that initial lift, so that you have time to get up on it. So the power is inferred. We don't measure it. We don't report on it, but it's inferred. All right. So that segues to what's coming next. Well, no, that's not fair, Brian. Do we have any questions, clarifications on our first set of terms that you guys are going to be accountable for? You got to know what position is. You got to know what velocity is. You got to know what displacement is. Work, power, energy. There's different types of energy. I didn't go over this little slide. I want to do it right now. So, a lot of different kind of energies. You got potential energy, you You got gravitational potential energy for our bodies, ATP, right? The cellular stuff that I don't like to talk about because that's like Harry Potter, like it's just like magic. Physicists who don't really care for magic. But like that's potential energy, and then when you use it, it becomes useful kinetic energy. The thing that I like about kinetic energy, energy of motion, is the formula for it, 1/2 mv squared. So what that means is that in terms of energy of motion, the actual motion is much more important than the actual mass because the velocity, whatever it's moving at, is squared. Like you get exponentially more on something the faster it's moving. No different than if you're in a car crash, heaven forbid you're not, so let's just use test dummies. Every mile an hour they go faster, exponentially increases the damage, like that kind of stuff. So with kinetic energy, one of the reasons is because the velocity of whatever you're measuring, the ball, the bat, it's squared. It's the square of the velocity. Potential energy, y'all got us learn that in high school physics and GH. We don't really use that a lot in our areas, and then power this work over time. Mass times gravity times height. All right, let's go on to this. Okay, guys, let's talk. Oh, come on. Yeah, you would. Copy, paste, yoink, yoink. Okay, guys, let's talk terms. Let's talk linear kinetics. What are some things happening in this exercise that are straight line forces? And layman's terms, this thing is pushing up, down, left, right. We're not going to use positive X and negative, just up, down, left, right, front, back. Linear, straight line, kinetic forces. What are some linear forces that are happening in this picture? Outstanding. Let's talk about gravity. Planet Earth, which is the object big enough. Every object produces gravity, but only the Earth itself has enough to make use. If you had 2 quarters, I don't know where y'all are from, but we say quarters, quarters. You have 2 quarters in deep space, and you put them an inch apart, in about an hour they're going to be touching. But that's without anything else pulling on, okay? So when we say gravity, we just want to make sure we understand it's the center of this planet that has enough of it. You know, some people like when the moon is da-da-da-da-da, the gravity of the moon makes people crazy. You know what makes people crazy? A full moon means there's literally light outside, or you could have day again, and people go do crazy stuff when you can see a bunch of stuff out. The moon isn't pulling significant, your pillow is pulling more in your fluid than the moon is at that distance, okay? That was, I don't know, random fact, I'm sorry, I'm just getting carried away. What is gravity pulling on? Well, every object we have in this picture, planet Earth is pulling down on the barbell. And we're going to call the barbell and the plates like one unit. So technically we could say the right plate, left plate. We're just going to say the sum of all that stuff as one rigid unit. So planet Earth is pulling down. What else linear kinetic is influencing the bar? Let's just keep having a bar conversation. What's pushing on that bar in a straight line?
The hands.
Yeah, absolutely. The palms or the hands. Yeah, again, layman's terms. Guys, you know what I'm not looking for? the thenar and hypothenar imminence of the hands works for me. Okay? So think about it. This isn't angular for the hands. For you to do a bench press, it's about straight up and down force. That's why, like, sometimes you may want to adjust your grip. But at the end of the day, it's left hand plus right hand. Is it pushing with the same amount of force as planet Earth is pulling down? More force than what planet Earth is pulling down? Or less force than what planet Earth is pulling down? The same. If you're holding that position, absolutely. But there's going to be times, if you keep it the same, you will never move that bar. That kind of hints into some 310, right? We got to let off, then we got to push more, then we got to. But the key is that the only thing, guys, your muscles aren't influencing that bar. Your hands are influencing that bar. Now, once we go down the chain, muscles are pulling on bones that are pulling on those, and then the hand is representing those things. But technically, at the end of the day, for that bar, it's all about how much are my hands pushing in a straight line, and how much is playing pulling in a straight line. That's linear kinetic. Linear kinematic. We're going to keep with the bar because I like this conversation where it's at. Linear kinematic, straight line movement conversations. Well, if he's holding that position, the position of the bar isn't changing. Same position over time, the displacement of the bar isn't changing. No displacement over time, the velocity of the bar staying the same, it's not changing. If the velocity is staying the same and not changing, that means the acceleration is zero because it's not changing the velocity. Those are all straight line kinematic conversations. Ups and downs. Angular, we're going to come back to the straight line conversation because that's the easiest for us to have. But let's go into angular kinetic conversations. Now we want to have conversations about the joints. The linear force, indirectly because of planet Earth, but more directly, that bar, just like the palm of the hand is pushing up on the bar, third law says it's impossible for that bar not be pushing down on the hand. Because of that, we have rotational moments and torques that are being applied to the elbow, the shoulder, rotational influences that are trying to horizontally abduct the shoulder or trying to extend the shoulder or trying to flex the elbow holistically. Has anybody ever thought, I think this is really cool, when you're doing a bench press and you kind of start off and then you kind of hit that little sticking point somewhere? Angular kinetic, that's when the push from the bar is furthest away from your elbow. So the external moment is the greatest right there. Think about it. When I'm down here, it's parallel. There's no moment technically at my elbow. And when I'm up here, the moment is negligible at my elbow. But when I get about right here, that moment from the bar is far away from my elbow. As far away from my elbow as it's going to be. So the external moment is the greatest, so my internal moment has to be the greatest. And what is your internal moment? Your muscles. Your muscles influence your joints through angular kinetics. Angular forces. So the angular kinetic conversations that we could have in biomechanics is, what is that bar trying to do to my elbows? What is the bar trying to do to my shoulders? What is, right? It's rotational conversations. It's trying to horizontally abduct, or it's trying to extend, or it's trying to flex. And then it's, okay, Well, what are my muscles trying to do at my joints? Well, my horizontal adductors are going to be pulling to try to horizontally adduct me, or my shoulder flexors are going to be trying to shoulder flex me, or my elbow extensors are going to be trying to elbow extend me. So far, so good. What about angular kinematic conversations? Speeding up elbow flexion, speeding up shoulder extension, speeding up horizontal abduction, constant velocity of horizontal abduction, constant velocity of horizontal adduction, constant velocity of elbow extension. And when I say constant velocity of elbow extension, that should infer that it's constant angular velocity. In other words, you're changing the angle at the same speed. You could also have position conversations angularly, like his elbows are in anatomical position. That's not a linear thing. It's an angular thing. Because my elbow could be an anatomical, whether it's high or low or inside or outside. It's not about linear, it's about angular. We can have an angular kinematic conversation about the position of the shoulders, the movement of the shoulders. Of course, guys, linear and angular, just like in Britain, we said like we have rotational world, we have linear world, and when those things come together, we have general motion. So like, imagine the person takes the bar and he bounces it off of his chest. So it's like the linear collision with the chest is pushing it up as well, helping out the angulars. So there's always going to kind of be a combination. But the key thing, and I think this is really cool and important, is that at the end of the day, your muscles are pulling on bone, but the bones are pushing on other objects. The hands are representing all of these angular kinetic forces, right? When I was, I'm left-handed, and when I first started lifting at Delcom, it might have been like freshman, and I was left-handed, so like my left arm was like a fiddler crab, like big claw, and this one a little small claw now. So we would be doing bench press, not a lot of weight, and I would be like this. Right? So again, like my left musculature was making my left arm do this, but I had to catch up my right musculature so that at the end of the day, both hands had to apply equal force. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's continue this conversation. He starts to lower the bar down. The bar went from not moving to moving. It changed velocity. Nothing changes velocity in 0 time. That's called magic. Everything takes time to speed up or slow down. So therefore, the bar had to accelerate. We know from Newton's second law, F is equal to ma. Unbalanced forces have to accelerate whatever we're talking about. In this case, we're talking about the bar. That means something has to be greater than something else. Well, the two main things affecting the motion of that bar, the two forces, the linear kinetics acting on that bar, planet Earth and the hands. The hands are pushing up. Planet Earth is pulling down. So if it speeds up coming down, that should be layman's terms to say planet Earth has to be greater. Because if my hands stay tied, it's not going to move. And if my hands become greater, I literally toss the bar up. I have to choose to let off and allow gravity to be greater. I'm letting off. I am choosing to push linearly on that bar with less than 130 pounds, both hands combined. Does that make sense? You're pulling away. Guys, it's no different than when you're on an elevator going down, you're standing, the door's closed, and you're like, hurry up and close before some other people try to come in. I know you think that too. When that elevator starts to go down, you kind of get a sense of free fall. Just a little bit. And it's not a lot. But what's happening is literally the bottom of the elevator is literally pulling away from your feet. It's pushing on you less so that planet Earth can speed you up. But not speed you up like free fall, just speed you up just a little, slow and controlled. So, linearly, kinetically, if you're going to let the bar come down, you're going to pull away just a little bit. Now, when I say pull away, I don't mean like a gang. Just you're going to let off a little bit to let planet Earth negatively accelerate you, to speed you up coming down. So in other words, you have to push on that bar with less than 135 pounds of force. Because if you didn't, it would never go anywhere. If you stayed pushing at 135, it would never move. You have to do less than the weight in order to let gravity come down. The only other option is if you work your lats and can't get anywhere. That doesn't sound very simple. Now here to me is the coolest part. Once you get just like an elevator, once you get a motion that you're comfortable with, 1 mile an hour, doesn't have to be a lot, slow and controlled movement. I'm going to teach you the secret to why that's important for rehabilitation especially. When that bar is coming down at a constant speed, that means gravity is no longer greater than your hands. Just think about it. If planet Earth was still pulling more than your hands, you would keep speeding up. You'd keep getting faster and faster and faster. The only way to keep it going at the same speed, slow and controlled, is to push on that bar with the exact same amount of force as the planet's pulling down. So this is the secret, and you're not doing any calculations. When you go slow and controlled, linearly, you're actually doing 135 pounds of work. You're actually doing the weight again. Slow and controlled. I'll give you the elevator analogy. Believe me if you want, or don't. I'm telling you it's true. I have a scale on the elevator. I'm on the 10th floor. I look down, it says 200 pounds. All right, 205. I didn't mention that. When the elevator speeds me up going down, I weigh less than the scale. But the entire time I'm going at a constant speed down, I look back at the scale and I weigh the same as I did before I started moving. I weigh 200 pounds. Because you don't even feel like you're moving. When the elevator's going down, you just kind of feel like I'm going down. Because y'all are both moving at the same speed. When you go slow and controlled, the hand and the bar are both moving at the same speed. There's no acceleration. You're not accelerating when you're going at the same speed. So all the forces must be balanced. So if planet Earth is pulling down on the bar at 135, your hands have to be pushing on the bar at 135. And think about it, for rehabilitation, that's really important to get your muscles, the hands are working through the extension of the muscles, to actually do the weight through as much range of motion as possible so that you don't have these imbalances in the range of motion. Or think of it like this, if that person would just let the weight free fall and kind of bounce it or change it here, he would get super strong or much stronger in this range of motion, but he would slack and be a lot weaker in this range of motion because these muscles just relax. See what I'm getting at? What speeds up must slow down. So eventually, when we come to the end of the road, and we don't chest bump in this class, I mean, you can, if you want to chest bump, you make it look great. But the point is that we just want the hands to influence the ball. We don't want the chest to influence the ball. So what speeds up must slow down. So when the elevator's coming down and it's time to stop, you feel it on your feet. You feel the floor push on you a little bit extra. Because if I'm going to stop, the basement, the floor of that elevator has to push on me with more than 200 pounds of force. That's how I'm going to accelerate. So it's the same thing, and you know this, you feel this, you've done this, regardless of the exercise you do. When it comes to stop, that's when things get tough. Like, you're like, so what's the biomechanical lesson? Even though those plates and that bar say 135, if you're going to stop it, you better be able to do more than 135. Does that make sense? And to make it come back up, to speed it up, going up, you better be able to do more than 135 pounds of force. But you don't need to do more than 135 to keep it going. And you definitely don't need to do more to let it stop. Because if you keep speeding it up, you're literally either going to throw it off your hands or you're going to catch it on your fingers, right? You're going to go, and you're going to let off. Because gravity can stop it. Make sense? So that's important. Personal trainers, physical therapists understand that in different ranges of motion, you're actually going to fluctuate between doing more and less. And hopefully, if you maintain a constant speed, doing the actual weight somewhere in the middle. Okay? Eventually, we're going to segue into contractions and concentrics and eccentrics, and when eccentrics would be doing more than the weight and less than the weight. But all of these are linear when we're literally just talking about the weight going up and down, your hands going up and down. Then you're kinematic when we're talking about the bar speeding up, slowing down, changing the position, displacement. Those are all movement variables. Force variables, pushes, pulls, gravity, friction. Angular stuff, our joints. Flexed, extended, flexion, extension. And angular kinetics is the muscles, the moments, torques. The flexion pullers and the extension pullers. And again, the cherry on top of today's class, hopefully, is just like on that slide with Newton's third law, how in the real world people say action, reaction. But it's not about movement, it's about forces. So if we confuse forces with movement, that's like confusing kinetics with kinematics. That's like confusing forces, not that they're not related, not that one doesn't cause the other, but they're not the same thing. So muscles don't necessarily, the angular kinetic muscle pull doesn't always cause an angular kinematic movement, is what I'm trying to do. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And sometimes, as we learned in 310, the direction of their pull can allow motion in the other way. Just like the push from my hands up can allow the bar to go down. And next class, when we get into concentric, eccentric, isometric, we're going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit further. Actually look at why they're named the way they are. Concentric, eccentric, isometric. But something eccentric is just kind of different. And eccentric contraction is weird. It's a little different. What do you mean you're pulling this way, but you're letting motion happen that way? Okay. That's what's coming. Any clarification questions? Yes, sir.
So technically, if, let's say the object is 225.
Yeah.
Technically, object is more than 225.
Absolutely. You have to. Yeah. Think of it like this. Think of it like, I'm going to go extreme. If this was me, you could put 300 pounds on that bar and I could do half a rep. It's coming down, right? The real challenge is, can I stop it? That's when you have to work more. Or think of it like this in layman's terms. When was the last time anybody moved furniture? Okay, then this will work perfectly. What's the hardest part about moving the furniture when you got friction from the ground? Not the whole motion, just getting it going is the hardest. Once you got it going, it's not as hard. Letting it stop, super easy. You just let off and it's going to stop. So it's very similar. That once you get it going, Linear wise, it's not as hard to keep it going. And once gravity keeps it going, now your muscles have to stop it. So you have to push on that bar more than the weight, unless you pass. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys. Y'all have a good one.